Welcome Home, a podcast for veterans, about veterans by veterans, is a project of Willing Warriors and the Warrior Retreat at Bull Run.
Good morning. I'm Larry Ziliaks, Director of Culinary Services here at the Warrior Retreat. And today's episode, we're going to have a talk with Colleen Shine. She's one of the founders of Sons and Daughters in Touch, which is a nonprofit organization that works primarily volunteers and family members of Americans killed, soldiers killed in Vietnam. And for 30 years, they have worked to get the word out about these missing soldiers and trying to relocate them and locate them and bring them back. And Colleen has her own personal story about that. But what I really wanted to do today was just reach out to her and let her tell you about this amazing organization and the work that they do. So, Colleen, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Larry. Thanks for the invitation.
So if you would, just tell us a little bit about Sons and Daughters in Touch, briefly about the work that they do, and then your own story and how you came to be involved with the organization.
Sons and Daughters in Touch is a national nonprofit, as you mentioned. It was started back in 1989. I was a founding board member, but I wasn't a founder. There was an organization at that time called the Friends of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, and they had an In Touch program, which connected for the first time veterans of those who were killed or missing on the wall with one another. And out of that, the program director for it was a Navy MIA wife, Wanda Ruffin. And she got a call from a son, Tony Cordero, out in California, who had read about the In Touch program and wondered, had Wanda Ruffin ever heard of a child of one of the 58,281 on the wall? And had they ever had any opportunity to also be in touch? Wanda said, yes, indeed, there was someone she could put him in touch with, and that was her very own daughter, Wendy. Mm-hmm. So when Tony and Wendy talked, they realized that, it was a lot of isolation during the Vietnam War, not only for the families and particularly for the POW/MIA families, but we were all isolated. We didn't have internet. We didn't have Facebook. There were no easy ways to meet and know others who had shared your experience. And so in coming together, Wendy and Tony were able to talk, realize that peer-to-peer mentorship was filling a void. I think there was some laughter, some tears, lots of shared experience. And out of that, there was a Parade magazine article written, and I think it had about 1,500 responses from sons and daughters around the country of the names on the wall. We know there were 58,281 names on the wall. Out of that, about a third of them were fathers. And so for the first opportunity, this organization started to plan National Father's Day gatherings in Washington, D.C. They got together and literally laid roses, red ones for those killed in action, yellow for the unaccounted for, the missing in action. And they had a giant picnic out on the East Knoll in the grass by the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall. Since that time, we've had 5 National Father's Day gatherings and a historic 2003 pilgrimage to Vietnam, which included 50 Gold Star sons and daughters. So the largest pilgrimage there ever of Gold Star family members, to go and see the sites where their fathers lost their lives, to find a way to honor them. And there have just been so many amazing opportunities and occasions. I can't say enough about the importance of connection with someone who shared that experience. Mm-hmm. Today, we recognize a lot about trauma, childhood trauma. When we, with the global war on terror and obviously with 9/11, we rose to the occasion, recognized the role of those families and the trauma's impact on them. That was not the case back in the Vietnam War. My own mom, my dad was an career Air Force fighter pilot on his second tour of duty in Vietnam when he was listed as missing in action at the very end of the war. His name is on the very last panel at the wall, and his little brother's is 5 panels west of that. He was an Army first lieutenant fresh out of West Point, killed in action in October of 1970. At that point, my dad had flown 100 missions. On his first tour, he escorted his brother's body home for burial at West Point, and then he went back into the Air Force to continue his job. His other brother, also a West Point graduate, was a South Vietnamese advisor who was wounded in Vietnam and came back. And then their sister she worked for the Red Cross in Vietnam at an Army evac hospital. And she came back from Vietnam having lost one brother killed in action, one brother missing in action, one brother wounded, to become a career Army nurse. And her service, we were able to recently register at the Military Women's Memorial, which keeps a national registry of women's service in this country. But so as SDIT was getting formed, we learned a lot about peer mentorship, as I mentioned before, about how important it was just to have somebody who shared your experience and to be able to communicate with them. But we also learned that there was powerful bonding and healing connection with our Vietnam veteran uncles, as we would call them, not blood relations, but connected on the wall, those veterans who served and came back. And so I would say this organization that you would think represents people who, had the greatest sacrifice in losing a loved one to war. And so they might not be as patriotic, and yet it is absolutely the opposite. They are threads of patriotism throughout the country. They're working with, Friends of Fisher House or the Tragedy Assistance Program or Mission POW MIA. They're active members of Vietnam Veterans of America. They're dedicating memorials. They're engaging and shedding light on the path for today's survivors. So it's been I'm very, very passionate about the organization and about the work it's done and is doing and will be doing. We're commemorating our 35th anniversary next year.
36 years.
35.
35. Wow. And when did you become
My gray
involved?
hair might say 36, but it's 35.
When did you become involved?
I became involved in veterans issues when I was 7. A family friend was prisoner of war in Hanoi Hilton. His name was Captain James Seahorn, and I wore his POW bracelet. Pictures of me and my dad with me wearing that bracelet. In October of 73, when all the prisoners were supposedly returned, Captain Seahorn came home, and my dad didn't. So I took off Captain Seahorn's bracelet. He's now a retired Air Force general down in Georgia. But I took off his bracelet, had my dad still on, and continued that advocacy as a child, both on the playground, on elementary school, passing out POW bumper stickers, selling POW bracelets. My mom was the South Carolina coordinator for the family member organization. She did a lot of work with Bob Hope. I actually just this spring was able to see a POW bracelet that Bob Hope wore. The Air Force Museum had it, and it was my dad's. So way back, our family did advocacy. My grandfather served as the finance chair of the National League of POW MIA families, and I later came to serve on its staff as PR director and then its board of directors. So I was just out of college in the 86, I guess, when I started to work for the National League of Families. And in 1989, as SDIT was getting formed, Tony reached out to the League of Families saying, we want to do something for children. And I got involved to say, if you do, make sure that you have a distinction for those who are still unaccounted for.
Mm-hmm.
They are technically Gold Star family members, but that uncertainty, that not knowing,
Sure.
made it for those families that they were first and foremost POW-MIA families.
Mm-hmm.
So I got involved and got on a steering committee for that very first Father's Day, and have been in it ever since.
Well, I myself wear a MIA POW bracelet that I got from the National League of Families in 1970. And
Wow. Who's your name?
Master Sergeant Mike Scott. He's missing in action since May 13th of 1969 near Kamdak, Laos.
Okay.
And he's...
My dad was right on that Lao border.
yeah, he's still listed as missing, and I'll probably be buried with it, unfortunately.
I pray you will not. First, thank you. I can't even tell you how much it means to a family member to know that someone thought about him, prayed about him, maybe even used him as inspiration. I know I've talked to folks who wore my dad's bracelet who said, as I was going through boot camp or training or whatever adversity in my life, I thought if Tony Shine could put up with what he did, I can put up with this.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope it's both enriched and inspired you, but more importantly, I just can't say enough the gratitude that families like mine have for people like you who were willing to keep the faith with our missing when it wasn't popular. I remember as a girl, Tom Selleck was the only other person outside of my family that I knew who wore a POW bracelet. He wore it on Magnum PI.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so heartened. By the time I got to college in the late 80s, I was looking at the POW-MIA flag beginning to fly in prominent places.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of solitude in an issue of a country wanting to move forward from a war and you're not being able to because you have to keep faith with your loved one. So again, thank you for that solidarity. I'm going to look him up when we get off the phone. I can tell you we're making progress. It is much slower than I would like.
Sure.
But we are making progress. There were recent identifications. The number of missing when our family got involved was around 2,500. We've had about 1,000 men accounted for since the end of the war.
Mm-hmm.
And now there's 1,578. It was 1,581 in May. So these aren't statistics. They're real men that are missed and loved and remembered.
Yes, and it represents important closure for families when they're found. There's a lot of people that don't know that the military still looks for missing and unaccounted for soldiers. They have a whole unit dedicated out of Hawaii that does nothing but recover and try to research and recover the remains of missing service members, which I know you have personal experience with.
I do.
You tell us a little bit about how your father's remains came to be located and brought home.
Okay. I would say first, you talked about the uncertainty and closure. And I do have to say it is the burden of uncertainty of not knowing for my mom if she was a wife or a widow, or us as children, not knowing whether dad's ever going to come home, whether he's alive or dead. That is an incredible burden to carry. And so, yes, it is important that we keep faith with the missing. And I think it's also important from a standpoint of when our active duties see that flag flying today, it's not just a matter of cleaning up the battlefield. It's also about standing behind those who serve today. That flag is recognized across the globe as we're going to stand behind, and you're not going to be left behind or kept behind following a war. In my dad's case, so he was missing in December 2 of 1972. He was on a reconnaissance mission in an A-7D at the very end of the war. He had strafed a convoy of trucks and then descended a cloud covering. It was south of Hanoi and north of Da Nang. His wingman lost touch. The search and rescue efforts proved futile, and he was listed as missing in action. For about 14 years, that's all we heard. We had no further information whatsoever. Then a series of what they called dog tag type reports started trickling in. One all the way in 1995 was a live sighting report out of Cambodia, but most were overlapping reports with dog tag type information or pictures of human remains that someone said could have been his. Anyway, we worked with our casualty, the Air Force Casualty Office, on each report, helping to guide and share any information we had or the search and rescue people had to try to bear on the case so that they could do the best investigation possible. Our government has indeed had various string of organizations responsible for this mission. So by the time, I think it was then the Joint Task Force Full Accounting, then the Defense POWMIA Accounting Agency is what we have right now, the DPAA. And so there have been some different evolutions of different aspects of the operational efforts. Originally, there was an organization in Hawaii called the Central Identification Laboratory. That was the case when my father's remains came through. And there was an organization called the Life Sciences Equipment Lab in Texas, which worked with all of the personal effects that were found in a case. And those two worked together. Now they are all under the Department of Defense's Defense POWMIA Accounting Agency. But what we were able to learn through repeated investigations is that there was a tentative crash site identified as related or possibly related to my father's. There was a villager who had a helmet that our government said had no identifiable markings. And our government came to our family through the casualty office and said, it's time to put this in a pending category. Excuse me, we don't think that there's anything more that we can learn in his case. And so it was before normalization of relations, but I decided to go over to Vietnam and try to make peace with the fact that 3 generations of my family and our government had all worked to learn what happened to my dad, but that there wasn't anything more to learn. And when I got over there, I learned that that was not the case, that there was a lot more to learn. I met with a Vietnamese villager, a witness in the case, and I asked him if I could see the helmet, and he showed it to me, and my dad's name was handwritten inside it. And then we had climbed a mountain the day before, and I had found serial numbers on a turbine engine and parts of the wreckage of his aircraft that were right on the surface. So I was able to come back and use that case as an example to testify on Capitol Hill and say, this shouldn't be happening. My family has been long involved, knows the acronyms of the different agencies, has been actively working this from every angle possible for decades. You need to do a better job. And they did. They went back in, they did a full-scale excavation. At that point, the grave had been disturbed, and some of the remains were taken out of the grave, but we were able to get mitochondrial DNA match, and we were able to bury some of my father's remains and really know that he did lose his life doing what he loved and believed in flying and serving his nation on December 2 of 1972. And we held a funeral at Arlington, complete with F-15 flyovers and all our family and some of the veterans. And it was a truth to face and move forward from. Really, really powerful. And actually a footnote to that is in October of the next year of 1997, a Laotian villager came to the U.S. Embassy in Vientiane, Laos, And because the case was so close to the border, that refugee returned additional remains, part of my father's jawbone. And the odontological records were even a better, more sure match than the mitochondrial DNA had been. So we absolutely know, we don't have all of his remains. We don't know all of the story, but we know that he was killed in action, and that peace of mind, is so worth it.
The organization itself must be a huge support group for Gold Star children. Really, there's not much in the way of resources out there for what we like to call hidden heroes, those children of soldiers who work with their wounded warrior fathers or mothers, but then when it comes to Gold Star families, they lose connection with the military in that sense. It's left to nonprofits and organizations like yours to be able to provide services for them to help them cope with trauma of the loss. And I'm just wondering, is there, what are the ways in which Sons and Daughters in Touch fulfill the needs of the Gold Star children, even those that are grown and much older now?
I can say we do a lot of different things. Some do directly relate to the mental health and wellness. So we recently advocated with the Veterans Administration that we are able to get bereavement counseling free of charge for Vietnam-era Gold Star families. That's not something that was available to us at the time, and it wasn't really available for many decades after the war either, but it is available now since the global war on terror. And so we're helping to, work with the VA to ensure that our members who need it have access to that counseling. We're doing some work on understanding and documenting, like learning about, I guess, a groundbreaking survey on what was that experience of those Gold Star children growing up in, during and in the aftermath of an unpopular war where there weren't resources, where there weren't connections. And I think in doing that, at least for most of us, we're grateful to know that today's generation will learn from what happened that was wrong, that will, learn some lessons and be able to help make the path less rocky for today's Gold Star children. So we're doing those surveys to understand that circumstance, to document it, and to learn from it. We do a lot of things. We're engaged with the Woody Williams Foundation. They've got 200 Gold Star family memorial monuments around the country, and some of them have been spearheaded by Sons and Daughters in Touch, Gold Star, and POWMIA children. I'm working on one in Myrtle Beach where my dad was last stationed. And as I think you may have seen recently, there have been dedications. There's one coming up in San Diego area. So sometimes it's helping. Obviously, we work with the Vietnam Veterans Memorial and other Vietnam Veterans Memorials around the country to make sure that there's some honor and recognition for those loved ones and their families that wasn't afforded back then. And in that process, there's community, there's a shared patriotism that goes a long way in the healing. We do a Facebook group that's very active where folks can say, wow, I'm burying my mother now. I had no idea it was going to trigger all of these feelings about having lost my father. Or earlier, as we outlived our parent, our father who died in war, that became something no one knew or, anticipated it, but it became a trigger for self-evaluation and reflection and, a bereavement again, to be older than this father that you had who died and is forever young in those images, in memory and in photos. So some of it has to do with honor and recognition. Some of it has to do with case resource work. Some of them never received their Gold Star lapel button. That's a connection to the long gold line of World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, where all we had was that. There
Right.
weren't organizations taking us to Disney or giving us a computer or having us gather or helping us with college. It just didn't exist. But we had that gold star lapel button, and it was, a source of pride and recognition of the combat service that our dads did and of their sacrifice and ours. So sometimes it's casework, care, community connection,
Mm-hmm.
making sure they're apprised of opportunities in their local area. We're just heading up an ambassadors program to make sure that we have representation in every state in a meaningful way.
Let me ask you, what is, first off, the web page? I would encourage all our listeners to go check out your webpage. It's www.sdit.org. A lot of information on the webpage. But what's the best way for a Gold Star family to get in touch with the organization?
They can find us on all social media, Sons and Daughters in Touch, sdit.org. Any communication to us through any form of social media, we will respond to quickly and love to get them connected, supported. And thank you so much for getting that information out there. We know there's about 20,000 children who lost fathers in that war. About a third of the names on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial are fathers.
Mm-hmm.
There are 8 women on the memorial, but we don't know of any of them being mothers. So there is a huge population. We have only tapped into about a quarter of that.
Sure.
So we are looking, we're looking to get the word out that we exist, that we've been doing good. We're going to continue to do good, and we would welcome any new members. And we also have support for widows and siblings as well through the years, obviously. But our primary focus has been the children.
Yes. Well, listen, thank you very much for joining us today. It's just an amazing organization. It does incredible work. If you're listening and you know someone who lost a father during Vietnam War, and they ask them about Sons and Daughters in Touch. And if they don't know anything about them, send them the link, send them the Facebook page, get them in touch with this organization. It doesn't really matter how long it's been. I think being involved with this organization would be good for anyone who lost a father during the Vietnam War. So it's a great resource. It's a wonderful organization. Get the word out, and especially around Father's Day. It really is worth putting anybody you know who could benefit from being in touch with them. Give them that information and send them that way. Colleen, thank you so much. It's great to talk to you again. And
thank you, Larry, for all the great work you guys are doing. We really appreciate Willing Warriors Retreat.
Well, we appreciate having a brick for your father out there, and it means a lot to us to have it in our memorial garden. And he's in good company with some amazing other soldiers who are no longer with us, but it's very special to us to have that brick there. Thank you for taking the time. And for listeners, we really appreciate you spending time with us today. And if you have any questions or need anything, you can reach out to us at podcast@willingwarriors.org. Until then, we'll have another episode next Monday. Thanks for listening.
The Welcome Home podcast is brought to you by Willing Warriors, a nonprofit organization serving active duty service members and veterans since 2012. To learn more, please visit our webpage at willingwarriors.org.